Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. Appreciate your time today. I'm not going to try to read all that up there, but we're doing a presentation on doing a system selection around WMS, TC, and labor. I'm Shane Smith, Senior Vice President with enVista. I've been in the industry about 30-some years. Started off in operations, working in a warehouse. Many years ago, we implemented a warehouse management system. Went through lots of pains through that implementation. And somehow I must have enjoyed that pain and decided to get into this business and do it the rest of my life. Nick?
Yeah, thanks everyone for coming. Nick Brown. I help lead our transportation team. And I've been in transportation my entire career, for better or for worse. Not quite sure yet which one. I started off as a driver manager, learning the psyche of a truck driver, moved my way through operations, and then finally into solution design, where I help design TMSs and select TMSs, vehicle routing systems, any kind of really transportation system out there. And kind of similar to Shane, a lot of the experience we have on the team is operational. And that really helps, we think, put us in the right spot to help other companies select what works for them.
Yeah, so enVista, we are in our 21st year as a company. We really have 4 pillars, if you will. Kind of starts with our strategy consulting side of our business that does network strategy, inventory optimization, some facility to design. Then we have our technology group, which you're meeting us to, and that's really what leads into our selection and implementation business. That's WMS, labor, and TC. So we do a lot of selections for companies as well as lots of implementations. And then we have a Microsoft practice, which really focuses on D365 from a finance retail standpoint, and then automation. So our automation is basically metal, material handling, warehouse control systems, those type of things.
When it comes to the technology team, we have these kind of core project types. From the transportation perspective, we do a lot of strategy work. How do we get to best in class? What's that roadmap and the kind of steps to get there? Often that builds the business case for the selection. Obviously, we're here today for the selection. We do implement a lot of the tools ourselves as well, but we are agnostic when it comes to tools. We are not a reseller, so we don't push a certain vendor, and some of our partners don't necessarily like that, but we want to stay true to the customer as much as possible. Post-implementation support, of course, and then modeling and analytics is also a little bit more transportation focused. You know, where's my fleet? How many trucks should I have? Benchmarking, where do we stand at the marketplace? Things like that.
So this is everyone's favorite thing to do, is throw up your logos and talk about our different customers, and I'll be really quick about this because I think what is important here is you see that we're in lots of different verticals. So when it comes to doing selections and or implementations, it really doesn't matter what vertical. The process is very similar. Obviously, the requirements are different depending on your vertical, but as you can see, we've worked in lots of different verticals, and it's just a subset of many of our customers.
All right, so today we're going to talk about really how do we kind of limit the risk of our software selection. We're going to go through kind of the beginning to the end of the process and give you some kind of pointers on how to do it, maybe some potholes to step around as we go through the process. So let's go ahead and get started. So when setting up the actual selection team, one thing you want to do is include all the different parts of the organizations or anyone that has to do with any upstream or downstream systems. Part of the reason to do this is when we're actually doing the implementation and the selection, you want to make sure that no one kind of raises their hand when you start and say, hey, no one told me about this, or I wasn't part of the process. When it comes to transportation, there might be accounts payable, it might be finance, and they may not come to all the meetings, but they're part of the process, and it's really going to help with that change management and adoption down the road. Another thing we want to be careful is the vendor's timeline. It takes a lot of effort for them to put together these demos, to respond to the RFPs, and we want to make sure that we provide them enough time to give us the best answer possible. The more time we can give them, the better they can respond to what we need, and really, we want to make sure we're picking the right solution, so we don't want to rush them. Also, what's in and out of scope? Let's talk about a transportation perspective. Sometimes, if we're doing all of our international shipments with a freight forwarder, it doesn't necessarily make sense to be brought into the TMS. Bringing in that specific functionality might jump us up to a tier 1 from a tier 2 tool. And with that comes a lot of costs. So we want to make sure that we have the rules of the road designed up front. And from a WMS perspective, do we have material handling? Do we have automation? Things like that. Sure that we outline all of that in the beginning, and then we can start moving forward. Okay, requirements. So there's a lot of different types of requirements. I think everyone hears about malware and like attacks, ransomware attacks right now. So security is pretty important. Also think of performance. Some of the companies are very large. We're going to have thousands of transactions an hour, a minute, maybe even a second. We want to make sure that we can handle all of that, as well as functional. Everyone probably recognizes these, and this is where we can come in handy, where a requirement could be we want to do a cross-dock. Well, there's actually about 15 different things we would want to break that into from a technical standpoint, because we don't want to allow the vendor to just check the box and be like, well, yeah, we could do a cross-dock. We want to make sure they can do it in the way we need to, that's going to set up our business case so we can get that ROI for the product.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, especially like if you're looking at your WMS as a whole. It's I was talking to a guy the other day, and they did a selection themselves, and I asked him, like, how many requirements did you put in your RFP? And he was like, we had like 100. And I was thinking that's probably not enough, right? Like typically our requirements are in the 1,500 range, because we want to drill down into those specific requirements that you need to run your business, not only what you do today, but what's best practice and what does the future look like for you. You want to build that out, because this is going to be a long-term relationship with that vendor. It's not just I want to put it in, do exactly what I'm doing today, and then we'll be done. You've got to be able to look out into your future from a business standpoint.
And don't worry, you don't have to put together all 1,500 requirements. We have a lot of those core ones already done, and then we'll customize anything that the customer needs. And kind of like Shane mentioned, look at that 5-year roadmap. If we're going to all of a sudden going to bring in automation, we're going to start shipping more parcel, we're going to do e-com, things like that, make sure you have those requirements in for the tool that you're going to have for the next 5, 10, 15 years. All right, how do we get down to our short list of providers? Now, it's different for different tools. If you come to a transportation management system, there's hundreds of them. I feel like a new one pops up every day. So you can do an RFI. It's a little bit more salesy. It's a request for information where you're going to say, what do you do? What do you focus on? Where are you successful? And that can help you kind of whittle it down to 4 to 6 players. You don't want too many providers in your answering your RFP, because it's going to be hard to distinguish between them when you get too many. And we're going to know kind of the key players in whichever market you're in, if you're a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And then when we're looking at this, be prepared for vendors to just decline. Vendors are there to win. They're not there to just send demos out, right? It's a lot of work, which we mentioned prior. And if someone comes in and they see the requirements list and they're like, we're not really good at parcel, but we need a lot of parcel, they're going to decline. And that's okay. Just be mindful of that going into it so it doesn't catch you off guard. Also, you might not hit certain minimum thresholds that a provider needs, so from like a spend scenario, and then they might push you to a reseller. That's okay. Resellers are okay, but just know that ahead of time, that if you're going for some of those, top labels, that if we're not big enough or have the FUM, they might push us down.
Yeah, I think it's a little different when it comes to the WMS space, because there's there's a few tier one solutions, 5 or 6 probably out there, and everyone's probably very aware of those. When you get into the tier 2 space and tier 3 space, there's more players, but typically we're not going to have in a WMS selection, we're not going to start off with 6 or 7 of those, right? You're usually starting around 4 is usually a high number, and then cutting it from a short list to 2. But again, those vendors are decided based on what your requirements are and what functionality you need. You may not need a tier 1. You may be able to go with a tier 2 solution and still be able to meet your long-term requirements.
And know where your organization is from a cutting edge or risk standpoint. I kind of liken it to buying the first car off the line. Maybe let's let someone else test the model out, kick all the bugs, and I'll take it year 2 or year 3. All right, demos. This is everyone's favorite part. A key call out for demos is they take 2, 3, 4 hours for these demos. So put the placeholders out as early as you can in the process. People will thank you later, and you're going to take up half a week's time for the core team. Another thing we don't want to do is be sold. We want to have the demos set up so they're only showing the functionality we need for our solution. And you do that by creating the demo scripts and enforcing the vendors to actually show us what we want to see. We don't want to see the shiny object that looks really cool, but we don't necessarily need it, right? And we want to make sure that we're not grading that. And the other thing we want to do is typically a lot of the operational folks, this will be their first time going to a demo. They'll be a little apprehensive on it, and bring them into a meeting, tell them what to expect, and tell them, hey, we can ask questions, or we're going to have a proctor, put them into chat. Someone's going to be controlling the chat and is going to ask the questions. And then tell them how to score the demo. We want to score everything. So what does a 3 mean? What does a 2 mean? Get everyone on the same page in that perspective.
Yeah, and you made a couple good points there. I think when it comes to the WMS space, those demos are critical, and you want to see a day in the life of what it's going to look like for your operation, right? Many of the vendors are going to want to come in and just show you a canned demo and guarantee they're all going to work, right? They're going to work exactly as expected. But you want to see what it's going to feel like for you. What are your associates that are working in the warehouse are going to feel every day? And does it provide the functionality that you need? Again, we often help with building out these demos based on some functionality, knowing the systems that may be a challenge for those vendors. And it's okay, you're going to have some potential enhancements, modifications to your system, but know that going in and know what that cost is going to be. So when you're looking at your total cost of ownership, you can factor that in your total.
Another thing we do is we'll provide data that you actually have. So you're going to see lanes or products actually demoed, and that really helps with being able to just kind of consume the demo. When you see like, oh yeah, I also ship from Lithia Springs, Georgia to Chicago. Or yeah, those are my SKUs in the warehouse. I recognize this. I can see myself doing that. It helps with the adoption and helps with being able to get to that answer, which is the selection at the very end.
Yeah, and Nick mentioned a while ago we need to share that information with these vendors early on, because it often takes 300 to 400 hours worth of effort to build out these demos. And it's often the long pole within this process. So the more time we can give those vendors to build those demos, the best visual thing you're going to see within their system, what it's going to look like to you.
All right. And then how do we evaluate everything? So we want to try to put a quantitative perspective on as much as possible. So we'll score the RFP from the requirements. We'll score the demo. We can calculate everyone's scores together. Of course, there's going to be some qualitative scoring as well. But it's hard to compare these tools that look vastly different but are doing the same thing. And so we try to take some of that, try to make it easy by putting a number to everything. It's also easier to send these numbers up the ladder, right? So you're going to have maybe the C-suite or the SVP above who needs to approve things, and they'll be like, well, why'd you pick A? Well, they got 3.4. They got the highest score. It's kind of hard to argue with that one. And we mentioned roadmaps before. Pay attention to your roadmap. We don't care about the provider's roadmaps. So they'll that, oh yeah, we'll have this functionality Q1 next year. Well, they're going to have it next year, Q1, and the year after that. It's going to keep rolling down the hill. So pay attention to your roadmap. Don't pay attention to the provider's roadmap. If they're saying they're going to do international shipping, next year, discount it and just see what they can do today.
Yeah, I think it's easy to make an emotional decision sometimes when you're going through this process. And it should not be an emotional decision, right? It has to be based on what the scores were throughout this process. And you can create your own scoring. It's easy to do. It's something that you can do yourselves, but it's a very important piece to, again, not let it be an emotional decision.
Yeah. And then client references. It's great to be able to call someone who's gone through the process with the tool that you've selected, and then you can ask them for any dirty laundry, right? What would you have done differently? Can you hear me? Oh, what was successful? What wasn't? And would you have selected this provider if you did it over again, right? These are great things to ask, and the provider can provide references, or we can too. So then they're not necessarily hand-picked, right? You get a yes.
Yeah, because this is a long-term relationship, right? It's not a simple, you're going to be in this for a year. I mean, I assume many of you already have WMSs, or you're maybe, have a homegrown system. You're looking to, that's why you're in here, you're thinking about going down a WMS path. You may have systems that you've had for years, longer than maybe some people have, than Nick's been alive maybe. And so you want to make sure that you're making the right investment.
All right, we've selected it now. How do we get the best price? So there's kind of three different flavors of negotiation for us. Sometimes we'll do it on behalf of the client. Sometimes we'll do it with the client, or we'll just provide some speaking and talking points ahead of that. We really see the sweet spot in number 2 there, where we'll do it with the client. You can do good cop, bad cop. We're happy to be the bad cop. It's much more fun. And over the years and the many selections we've done, we know where the price points are. We also know what to negotiate on and what not to negotiate on. And while you're doing this, recognize that you've created a connection probably with this sales team. When you do the implementation, they'll leave, and then you'll have the implementation team. Sometimes that comes as a shock because you've been talking to someone for 6 months, 9 months. It can take a little while to make these decisions, but just recognize that the sales team will shift on to the next customer, and then you'll have the implementation team. And they're the smart ones. They're the ones that are going to screw it in, know the functionality, and kind of get everything from you. So just be prepared for that, as well as the time it takes to actually make the decision. Often the core team will come together and say, yep, it's number 2. You have to get that approval up the ladder, and now you're on someone else's timeline, right? Then they might need to get the approval from above them. So it can kind of keep on rolling downhill and take a little bit. So just know that, so you're not promising any kind of dates internally, then have to keep on backtracking that. Another thing when it comes to who you select, we've been talking about relationships a lot. There's no prenup for this. And you're kind of dating the provider the whole way, and then you're going to get married. You're going to be with this tool for the next 10, 20 years, and you can't back out. So this is one of the reasons why the process is so kind of robust, and it takes a lot of time, because this tool is going to be integral to your system or to your operations for the next, decade to come. So just be careful, take your time with it, and really, does anybody have any questions?
You mentioned that scripting is a process. Is it possible for vendors to use the scripting to test material handling interfaces? early on with material handling providers
Sure.
who are integrating the system?
Yeah, that's a good question. And in some cases it is, right? So we have done selections before where we were able to do a connection into their material handling equipment. The problem is to see it in real life, right? You can do that from a technical standpoint and see things work, but to be honest with you, even in an implementation side of it, that's a tough thing, right? You got to shut down your operations. You got to be able to make sure everything's flowing through, and you just have to build that time into your implementation. The best thing to do in those situations is to find Nick mentioned customer references, right? Find a customer that's using the same type of material handling equipment as you, that has that vendor, and those integrations have been built and proven. Have discussions with them, ask them what that cost was, ask them how that worked out through that process.
And to kind of match that with transportation, a lot of customers want to do what we call a bake-off. Who can optimize my network the best? Or for a vehicle routing and scheduling tool, who can do it with the fewest number of assets and things like that? We actually advise against doing this because it really is whoever can bend the rules the most is going to have the best answer, but it's not realistic. So we want to make sure that we go ahead and we can model it before we have a TM, and then we ensure that the TMS can actually do the functionality to bring our ROI to fruit.
Yeah, Nick, I think you don't have to mention who the customer is, but you were aware of a situation you talked to yesterday, right? Where
Yep.
the demo showed something, and then once they started doing implementation, it was completely different, right?
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we will help with. We know a lot of the vendors' capabilities, and if they say yes to something and we know they can't do it, we'll go back in there and be like, let's see this in the demo because we don't buy it. And it can really save you because the salesperson's trying to get it out there and get it past the door. And like I mentioned, then they leave and you're with the new team. And sometimes they'll leave the company, which happened to a customer of ours just recently that Shane mentioned. And it's a shame because you've already started. I told you there's no prenup. They're halfway through the implementation and now they're finding it out. Yeah.
Do you ever find it possible to structure the deals so that you have like a couple of commitment phases and you can back out? Have you been able to do that?
So we've done phased approaches before, and that is depending on the functionality or where you are regionally, it can make a lot of sense. And then sometimes if things aren't going the way you want, you can stop. And then you just don't keep on rolling it out. But typically, once you get to the first stage, you're probably going to keep it and then just be like, well, it wasn't exactly what we thought, and you won't keep going. You're not going to make Europe, for example, eat the same sandwich that you just had to here.
Yeah, and I think there's oftentimes like where you're starting to pay license fees early on, right? Even a year before you're live with that system. So there are some negotiation tactics and ways to help reduce that cost early on by sometimes not paying for that in its full until you start your implementation. It's rare, but they'll do it. Any other questions?
What about using simulation, computerized simulation as a test? Is that common, or to what degree? And the other one would be a proof of concept. So to do a small version of what you're looking for maybe as a stage 1 to part of the test.
Sure. Yeah, so that's a lot of what we want in the demo. So if let's say it's a vehicle routing and scheduling tool, we'll provide the number of assets, we'll provide the delivery schedule, and ask them to show it while they're there. And then you'll see that create 30 routes, it'll create all right turns, it'll create everything that you need to see. And so, yes, we'll do that. And if it's just a regular TMS, for example, we'll want to see a multi-leg shipment. We'll provide a shipment in the past that actually did that, what you're currently doing today, and then watch it actually plan.
Yeah, so I don't know if you're talking about from a transportation standpoint or from a WMS standpoint, but from a WMS standpoint, that proof of concept is often part of this selection process, right? It extends your timeline a little bit, obviously, because they got to build that out, but it is a very important piece. Even, years ago when we used to do implementations, it was like you would build out your entire system and then you would go through and start testing it. We've really changed our methodology around that, where we do more proof of concept. Like, let's build out what it's going to look like from a receiving standpoint. Let's prove that out, right? And then we move on to different phases. In the end, you're still going live typically with all of it, sometimes in phases, right? Sometimes you're going into a greenfield warehouse and you're just going to start receiving in product, and you can do that with your new system and then transition to other pieces.
Perfect. Any more questions?
Awesome. Thank you guys very much.
Well,
Appreciate it.
One thing we will say is come by booth 3789. We're right over there. Happy to answer any questions and walk you through the process.
Yeah, thank you all.